Hello, I'm Jake Boudrot, Civic Journalist at Tello Community Television. With me today is the candidate for the People's Party of Canada in the new federal riding of Cape Breton-Canso-Antigonish. Welcome, Ryan Smyth.
Thank you very much, Jake. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I guess the best place to start is at the beginning, and maybe you can talk about your life before politics, where you're from, maybe where you went to school and where you've worked, and things of that nature.
Sure. I was born in Galt, Ontario, which no longer technically exists as a township. The Galt, Preston Hespeler formed this corporation of the city of Cambridge, and I grew up there. I went to Wilfrid Laurier University and left to work overseas for about 20 years. I spent about 14 years in South Korea, some time in Malaysia, and a few years in Australia as well. And when my wife and I moved back to Canada, we moved to Cambridge and then out here to Antigonish, and she teaches at St. FX in the business department. For work, I do software. So I've done everything under the sun, all the way from, designing, UX, UI, marketing, translating into other languages, a lot. So today I'm a partner in a blockchain video game platform called Zaya, and Soccerverse is a game based on the platform. And basically what Zaya does is it does for video games what Bitcoin does for money. So that's a lot to get into, so we'll skip that. But I'm also working on some IoT devices, and my main focus right now is, other than the election, and is a device to help people quit smoking.
So based on the experiences you've had in your life and the skills you've acquired, how do those make you, how are those a good match for you to be Member of Parliament for Cape Breton-Canso-Antigonish?
It's a good question, and don't think you're going to get the answer that you might be expecting. I don't think anybody's really qualified to rule over other people's lives. I think people are best to make decisions for themselves. You're the best person to make decisions for you. Nobody else can really do that. And what MPs do is they come up with a one-size-fits-all solution to every problem. And the progressive new liberal solution to every problem is to spend more money. In software, there's a general principle that you can solve any problem with a layer of abstraction. And you can apply this, in other areas as well. And if we start looking at, the kinds of problems and issues that people have, throw that layer of abstraction on top, and we almost invariably end up with money, the economy. So what I want is for people to have the maximum amount of freedom. That means civil liberties, and it also means economic freedom. And higher taxes and more taxes means less economic freedom. And today, our economy is not great. We've heard talk about the 51st state. Unfortunately, the average Canadian makes less than the average American in the poorest American state. And that's a sad state of affairs. And it doesn't need to be that way. We live in the richest, time in history. Like a few hundred years ago, kings couldn't possibly imagine, what we have today. It's absolutely astounding. So if you just think back 100 years, 200 years, 500. The amount of wealth that we have today is incredible. But the best person to spend your money is you, because you know what your needs are better than anyone else. So I think that's really why I would be a decent MP, I don't know if you can really be good, is just to return freedoms to people.
Why did you decide to run in this federal election, and specifically why do you want to represent, or why did you want to represent the People's Party of Canada?
Well, the People's Party of Canada is a principled party. You look at the platform and you can see that across this, that, and the other policy, there are consistent themes, and they're principled. It's not determined by polling. Polling is a really bad way to determine policy, because public sentiment can sway radically, but if you're principled, you can predict, what a policy will be, when you're presented with a new issue. So that's why I like the PPC, and I'm running to sort of help get out that message of, freedom, civil liberty, economic freedom, and that free markets and trusting people, will empower the Canadians to create businesses, to create jobs, and to make Canada wealthier, healthier, a happier and more prosperous society.
As you see it right now, what are the major issues facing the riding of Cape Breton-Canso-Antigonish?
You can ask 10 people and get 20 different answers. And I'm going to go back to abstraction. And let's abstract out those issues, whatever they are, and invariably, they're going to end up, as funding, money. People want to do this or they want to do that. We want, like a swimming pool here, or we want, a language and culture center here. But they don't have the money. But we live in the wealthiest time in history. Why don't they have the money? When you address the economy and you return that money to people, they can spend it better than government. Milton Friedman pointed out 4 ways to spend money. The first way is that you can spend your own money on yourself, and you economize and you get the best value. Or you can spend your own money on someone else, as in a gift. And you're going to economize, but you might not get the best value as you would for yourself. You can spend other people's money on yourself, like if you have an expense account. So you go out for lunch and you get the best lunch, and you don't really care so much about the cost. And the fourth way to spend money is to spend other people's money on other people. And you don't economize, and you don't really care that much about the value. And that is how all government money is spent. Other people's money on other people. It's the absolute worst way to spend money. The best way to spend money is for you to spend money on yourself. So if we stop taxing people, lower or eliminate taxes, get rid of regulations that stop people from creating businesses, then we can create an environment where Canadians can be innovative, creative, make things, sell things, buy things, trade things, and increase that level of prosperity for Canadians. And when you do that, when people have enough, they don't need to ask government for money because they're self-sufficient. And that's a terrifying thought for government because they like dependency. They like you dependent on them. But what is in your best interest is that you're self-sufficient and independent and you can do as you please.
What solutions or strategies would you employ to address the issues that you just mentioned? I assume you're more along the lines of deregulation, less government red tape, and more freedom for people, I assume is what you're advocating.
Yes, absolutely. It really is that simple. I could give you, some silly examples, of just silly things, that actually could be a real business for somebody. So I don't know if, how old you are, if you remember the old Bruce Lee movies or whatever, but once upon a time in the long ago, politicians decided that, look at nunchakus, and they're, oh my God, we got to make these things illegal. Have you ever heard of anybody, running around, hitting people with nunchaku? They're a prohibited weapon. You go to prison for that. But are they really that dangerous? No, not really. So this is just a silly example of, something that you could, with the stroke of a pen, get rid of that law, and that opens it up for somebody to manufacture that product. That product, in turn, is going to be purchased by people. You're going to have employees and jobs there. People get those products. In a martial arts studio, they may practice with it, so it's creating jobs over here. However we deregulate, we just need to, think about whether or not these regulations are really needed. Sometimes you do have to, have regulations. And very often you can actually replace regulations through insurance and associations. So you have like the Canadian Bar Association or the Nova Scotia Barristers, Solicitors, I forget the name of it. And these associations certify professionals in different areas, whether it's HVAC or whatever. When you go out and you hire somebody to do a job for you, whether it's a doctor, or a pharmacist, you want somebody that you can trust. And with certifications from professional organizations, you can have a degree of trust, if you believe in this organization. Insurance, for a doctor, lawyer, whatever, also helps build confidence. And you don't actually really need the regulations in some cases. So if we remove the impediments, for people to go out, create businesses, create jobs, we can have a lot more. Like here in Nova Scotia, we have, was it something like 69 trillion cubic feet of gas onshore. Now that's provincial jurisdiction, but there are like 121 trillion cubic feet of gas estimated, offshore, and that's federal jurisdiction. But nothing is being done. That's just sitting there. That's a gold mine. A lot of Nova Scotian youth leave Nova Scotia to get jobs, and a lot of people, end up in Alberta, in the oil fields there. Well, we've already got a trained workforce. If we took advantage of what we have here, there's a trained workforce with family here. Bring them back home, and you've got a gold mine of wealth there. These are good, high-paying jobs, but we've got a government problem. This isn't a Canadian people problem. There are companies that have tried, and they just throw up their hands. No, can't do it. These guys aren't going to let us. Goodbye, see ya. And they take their money and leave. It'd be much nicer if, to have that investment here, in the Canadian people, and specifically here, in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton-Canso-Antigonish. This is a huge riding, and we've got a huge coast. So there are definitely jobs, that we could have. But yeah, deregulate and allow people, to do things. I'm not saying deregulate to allow people to be criminal, because we already have regulations that allow criminality. If we, I forget the section, I think it's 45 of the Commerce Act, makes it a an offense punishable by up to 14 years to participate in a cartel and or a fine. But what is supply management? Dairy cartel for your milk, cheese, eggs, poultry. This is a cartel. But wait, this is a criminal offense? No, but it's, so what's going on? The PPC policy on supply management is to get rid of it. And you have farmers that have paid for their quota, and you've got to compensate them for it, because they don't have a choice. They have to. If you want to be a dairy farmer, you have to play the game. That's the law. So when it comes to regulation and criminality, you can't allow companies to harm people. So you can't have pharmaceutical companies or food companies, making poisonous things that hurt people. You can't have, people making, machines that are egregiously dangerous. I've got a table saw. Table saws are devastatingly, terrifyingly dangerous things, okay? But, there are safety mechanisms built into them. But you could build one that, is gonna hurt people because it's designed wrong. I'm not advocating for, letting people do stuff like that. That's simply wrong. You don't get to go out, and, flog off some piece of junk that's gonna hurt people. That's criminal. You don't get to hurt people. But there are many areas of regulation that there's no really good reason for it.
As you know, the riding of Cape Breton-Canso-Antigonish now includes all of the County of Richmond, Town of Port Hawkesbury, Inverness County, Victoria County, parts of the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, Guysborough County, and Antigonish Town and County, making it a geographically vast riding by all accounts. So I guess my question is, how have you been campaigning since the writ was dropped, and what are your plans for the days ahead in the campaign?
My team is me, myself, and I. So I've been spending most of my time, emailing people, doing interviews like this. But this is such a massive riding. It's about 12 times as large as your average Halifax riding. For me to go out knocking door to door, it's a drop in an ocean. It's not really something that I can do on my own, and do everything else. So I'm focusing my time on, basically electronic communications with people and interviews and debates, because it's simply, beyond my bandwidth to, run a physical campaign with, signs and everything like that. I simply, it's not realistic for me.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy campaign schedule and busy personal schedule, I'm sure, as well, to sit down with me, answer my questions, and speak with our viewers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed this. Thank you, Jake.